That is Canyon de Chelly.
That's when you went on that trip.
Mm-hmm. Over there. Okay, can you, I can hear myself. Yay. Trying to decide if I have to wear my glasses or not.
Did you go down where the water is?
We did not. No, it's you can't tell from that picture, but it's far down. I have not had a chance to look for it. I think I put it up in the Verizon. Yeah, I am going to look for it though. I'm so sorry that that has been a.
I remember when you came back, did you go to Roswell?
What?
And when you came back, I wanted to know, you said, did you go to Roswell, New Mexico? No. I know, when the tubs look at aliens.
Oh, yeah, I want to get a look at it.
Yeah, I know, but I just thought because I
You don't have to take everything. I just have things there, so I'm going to talk about it. And then you can decide what you want.
she's gonna, when after, when she's done, then I'll do I have,
It's a lot of homework. I was just trying to give people, you know, if you're interested in certain things. You don't have to take everything. I'm going to talk about different things, and if you're then at the end, if you want something,
okay.
so don't feel obligated to take papers. Yeah, don't feel obligated to take the papers.
How you doing?
And Jonah, if I walk away from the microphone, just yell at me. Oh, it's 7 o'clock. Okay. I believe the sign-in sheet is somewhere. Great. Yeah, you don't have to take everything. If you see something you want, go for it.
Do I have to have a sheet?
No, you don't need the papers for tonight. Those are strictly if you're interested in further reading, then you can take those. Yeah, next week is a test on all of it.
So I have to take a train. I don't fly. I don't fly. I take a train.
I'm going to wait just a second. We got a few more people coming up here. Somebody have the sign-in sheet somewhere? Okay. Can you go tell them? I'll be back. I think we're going to get started. If the sign-in sheet is going around, if you haven't had a chance, at least by the end of the night, if you could just sign your name. The church likes to keep track of who's here. But first of all, for anybody who might watch this who I don't know out, I think I know everybody sitting here, so that's just wonderful. But my name is Michele Holifield, and I'm a member here at First Pres and also work here. And I'm really excited to be here for the next 5 weeks talking about this topic. I hope that tonight is kind of an introduction, and then after tonight we'll really get into some of the details and things. But I feel like it's a topic that maybe we all need a little bit of an introduction to because it's not something that we normally talk about. So the title of the class is a little bit long, and I tried to think of something creative, but in the end, it just is what it is. So, but the history and consequences of the doctrine of discovery and why it's important for the church today. And so I'm going to go through some slides, and we're going to talk about some different things. But first, I want to, since we are talking about Native Americans, I want us to remember that tonight we are gathered on the traditional homeland of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa. They were stewards of this land long before the Arlington Heights was settled by European immigrants. This is what you call a land acknowledgement. Many organizations that you might visit now do have these. The Chicago Presbyterian has a land acknowledgement. This one I got permission. It's not exactly what they have, but Our Savior's Lutheran Church right up on North Arlington Heights Road, this is from their land acknowledgement. And it's simply stating that we know that we were not the first people here. That's right, I'm turning the slides, okay. So I just want, again, to welcome you. And then I wanted to give you some background about how this class came about and why it's important to me. So my family has Cherokee heritage. My great-great-great-grandfather was actually, his parents were of Scotch descent, which was very common in the Cherokee in Georgia, North Carolina area, and his mother was Cherokee Indian. And so you can imagine this was quite a while back, late 1700s, early 1800s. My great-great-great-grandfather, Stephen Foreman, he went to school, was very educated. His parents felt that was very important. He ended up becoming a Presbyterian minister. He befriended a white missionary that lived with the tribe. And so he ended up being trained at Princeton Seminary and came back and was and was a leader in the tribe. But then at the time of the Cherokee being moved out of Georgia, he had to leave. And he actually was part of the crowd that I can't tell that whole story tonight, but he was part of the crowd that was not for removal. And so he ended up, along with many other Cherokees, being rounded up and put in basically a camp until they were moved out. And he was one of the conductors, they called them, on the Trail of Tears. So he was one of the people that led one of the, I believe, 9 groups of thousands of Cherokees to Oklahoma. And when he got to Oklahoma, he helped start one of the first Native American churches there. He was a superintendent for the schools and ended up being one of the Supreme Court justices. After that, and he married a person who was not Cherokee Indian, also very common. So my great-grandmother was also Cherokee. Part of the tribe, was allotted land and things that we'll get into later as we go along. But she married a white man, and they moved away because at the time in the early 1900s, being Native American wasn't really very cool. So they moved away, but they lived in Los Angeles, and that's where my grandma was born, and they named her Cherokee Foreman Reed. And when they brought her back home, her father's family was not happy about that name. And so they said, oh, her name is Mary. So we had, when she went to get a passport in the 1940s, that was quite the to-do. But I've been interested in all of this heritage for a very long time, trying to learn more and more about my family. My great-grandmother passed away when my grandmother was 3. And so she didn't live on the reservation for very long, but my great-great-grandmother did. But my grandmother lived in Arkansas because she was raised mostly by her father's family after her mother died. But we still retained interest in this. So a few years ago, I became even more interested in this whole heritage and found out that my family, myself and my kids, are actually eligible to be enrolled citizens of Cherokee Nation. And so I went through a very long process because there was no document of my grandma being Mary Eileen Brooks, because her birth certificate said Cherokee Foreman Reed. But I gathered all the information, and after I went on a PCUSA travel-led seminar this spring, where I learned much more about Doctrine of Discovery, I'm like, they have to approve this. So I sent in all the paperwork I possibly had, and I thought this might be interesting for people, but I did get accepted, I guess, or enrolled, they call it. And so they send you these blue cards, and they assign you, good or bad, I don't know, but you are assigned a number. I don't have the photo one yet because I actually have to go to the reservation to get that, and I don't have that yet. But you are assigned a number, and you can get a photo ID that you could actually use to travel. And they also send you, from the Department of the Interior, your blood quantum card. So I actually feel, I know there's a little bit about like being assigned a number and things, but I'm actually very proud to have this. It meant a lot when I got it. But also when I attended the PCUSA travel seminar this spring, it was 9 days with 30 other Presbyterians, and we traveled throughout the Southwest and looked at, visited a lot of Native churches on the reservations, and just learned so much that I just would like to be able to share all of that with you. So that's a little bit long of an intro, but I just want you to know where I'm coming from when I talk about this. After this, I'm hoping the class format will be some discussion and questions, and you telling me kind of what you know and what you want to know. I do have a lot of resources over there on the table. Please don't feel like you have to take that and read it at home. You don't have to, but we might talk about something that just strikes you, and then feel free to pick those up. If I run out of copies of anything, I'll make more for next week. Any questions about that? I also, there's a resource list over there, podcasts, movies, books, all kinds of things that you might find interesting. All right, so let's, so why, besides my own interest, why would we have a class about this topic? So at the 2016 General Assembly, in the General Assembly is a large meeting of the PCUSA. It brings together people from all the presbyteries and synods. Pastors, ruling elders come together and make decisions about how the church will operate for the next 2 years, I guess. They actually approved an overture in 2016 that repudiated the doctrine of discovery, which means they said it stinks and it's wrong. And in 2018, it was followed by an expanded report that calls on all of us to take action. That was 2018, so 5 years ago, and we're still kind of working on it. And then at the 224th in 2020, the Native American Coordinating Council has also issued a set of recommendations. And that is, there is a bigger handout over there, because, you know, Presbyterians like to write stuff. But this is the bigger packet that contains all three of those. And so after tonight, if you really want to know the details of the doctrine of discovery, take one of these, because it really outlines it really well. We only have an hour here tonight, so I'm not going to get into all of the, I want more a chance for us to talk and things. So, but this has lots of the details. So you might want one of those. And then finally, as a community of faith, we are called as part of the Presbyterian Church to take steps to learn about our past, to right wrongs. If we learned history the wrong way, or we learned something that wasn't quite how we thought it was, then we're responsible to do something about that. And so that's why I, after just my own experience and going on that travel seminar, where I will tell you, when you attend PCUSA travel seminars, you are, you're not just on a trip for fun. They pretty much tell you when you come back, you better do something about it. So here I am. So just a little information on Native American churches in the PCUSA. There are 8 synods within the PCUSA who have some form of Native American ministries. Most Native American churches are located on either a reservation or what they call a trust land. So out in the Southwest, the Pueblo were actually never put on reservations because they actually beat the Spaniards and won, but their land still got put in trust. So while they don't really have their own land, it's not the same as a reservation, a little bit different. And I didn't know that till I went on that trip. Yes.
The United States is holding that land in trust
Yes.
for actual original owners,
Yes.
the humans.
Yeah. So there's more in the news now about land rights and things like that. And we are in the next week's going to talk about some of those current issues that are going on because of that. And especially out in the Southwest, if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, any of those things, definitely has to do with land trust and who owns the land and who can move who off their land and who owns underneath the land and who owns actually on the ground. Amy?
There's a lot of poverty.
There is a lot of poverty, yes. There are approximately, and I said approximately because sometimes they just can't sustain themselves, so this number changes a lot, but there are approximately 95 Native American congregations in the United States. There is a list on the table, so if you're interested, it's also online. You can go on the PCUSA website and look at that. I feel I didn't mention at the beginning, and I don't know why, but one of the other things that I've done over the years was when this congregation was active in the Dakota Partnership, which traveled to the Lake Traverse Reservation in South Dakota. I myself and my 3 children traveled there for 10 summers. And so I've had actually the privilege, I counted up, and I have actually visited between there and the trips I just went on about 15 of these Native American churches. So I feel really privileged to have done that. There is one Native American church that's in Phoenix, Arizona, that is Central Presbyterian Church. It's not located on a reservation. It's right in the kind of downtown area of Phoenix. We actually went there when I was on this travel seminar. They have a wonderful pastor who has been there for, I think she grew up in that church and then came back, and she's been there about 20 years. She's just a remarkable person. Any questions on how Native American? The churches are very small. And if I've visited them with a group, we far outnumber the people who are at worship. They a lot of times have lay leadership because that's what they need to do. 10, 12 people. Small. Like this group here is bigger. Small. But let me tell you that sometimes I really thought about it. I know I told Kim when I came back that sometimes we sit here in this congregation and we're so worried because we only had 150 people at worship. And I'm like, I just went to like 5 churches that had like 10 people, and they aren't talking about any problems. It's not that they don't have them, don't get me wrong, but they just go on. And I saw some of their budgets. I mean, one of them had their annual budget hanging on the wall, and it was like $9,000. I was like, oh my goodness. They do, they don't get as much help as they probably need. And we're going to talk about that down the road. Any other questions about? All right. So this is just kind of give you an idea of what we're going to talk about. So if you came tonight and you're like, what is this going to be about? Tonight we're just going to talk a little bit about what is the doctrine of discovery. Next week we're going to talk about the U.S. history of Indian removals, the Trail of Tears, the Long Walk, some of those things, and the church's role in all of those things and how they worked with the U.S. government to try and assimilate the Native Americans. And we're going to talk a little bit about Thanksgiving and how we feel about that. There's no class the week of Thanksgiving. On November 29th, we're going to talk about boarding schools, and I would imagine that a lot of you have probably heard some about that. It's been in the news quite a bit lately. And then in December, we're going to talk some about land and water rights, which has also been a lot in the news. We're also going to do a little topic about missing murdered Indigenous women. That is a huge issue on the reservations. When I have visited reservations, everybody has a family member who's missing or has been killed and not solved. It is a huge issue for them. And we're going to talk a little bit about artifacts. You may have seen that the Field Museum has recently reopened their Native American exhibit. And part of that is because you might remember when you were young that you would go there and they would have like Indian skulls and things like that. That is just not considered. And Illinois has actually passed a law. We actually had Mark Walker, who actually sponsored that bill. He was here and spoke to our youth this summer about that bill and how he went about doing that in order to return items to the Native Americans. And a little bit about tribal sovereignty and what that means. Some of you may have heard in the news about some of the U.S. Supreme Court cases involving particularly Oklahoma, where there's been some cases that have to do with who can try cases and things like that. If you haven't, Google it and you'll see what the Supreme Court's been dealing with. Part of it is whether or not Oklahoma, much more of the state of Oklahoma, is actually a reservation, including the city of Tulsa. So it's very, I think it's very interesting if you go and just Google it, it will come right up. And then on the last night, we're going to actually talk about what are some things that we can do. You know, what are some concrete actions that we can take? You know, I really do feel there's a lot to be learned. It's a lot to take in and a lot to think about because, like me, when you were in school when you were young, you learned in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And then you learn something, you go, what? Oh, I didn't know that. So there's just a lot to think about. So I would like to start with anybody who would be willing to share with us, when you were a child, how did you perceive Native Americans? What do you remember learning? Anything? David?
I started grade school in the 1950s. And so, on the one hand, I think Native Americans seem to be props in a larger, more important story. Story involving white people. And then watching TV westerns as a kid, the Native Americans, iron discipline, savages, and if they're shot, then that's a good thing. And it was all very xenophobic, of course, and simple-minded.
Sure. If I turn that on, then can people pass it around? Okay. I'll summarize yours. You got more to say?
No, not really.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, everybody. Oh, got it. Okay. So David was saying that he started school in the 1950s, and so there was a lot of watching the westerns, and if Indians were killed, that was a good thing. And did I forget anything?
It's the prop aspect.
The prop, yes.
Really struck me.
Yeah, that they were just more a prop, and you dressed up with your Indian headdress, things like that. Anybody else? I'm going to pass it back here.
Yeah.
Have a little bit of a bad knee.
My husband grew up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is a large part of the Native American general community. Even after he was an adult and we were looking through his childhood pictures, he and his best friend played cowboys and Indians. Bang, bang, you're dead. Even in that culture, that was still okay to do.
And then pass to Susan when Rich is done.
The only thing I remember as a child was, as she said, cowboy movies and Tonto. I remember Tonto, he was a good fella.
I remember.
These days it's space aliens and all that kind of stuff. Back when I was young, it was cowboys and Indians. But not always in a bad sense. I remember some of the serial things that they were promoting had to do with Indian culture and how they dressed and what this was and what that was. And even in the Boy Scouts, we had many activities that had an Indian flavor. In fact, our family album has a very attractive picture of me dressed as an Indian. I mean, it wasn't in a negative sense. It was just, I don't know, it was just there.
It's how it was.
Yeah.
My dad grew up on reservation land in northern Minnesota, and there was a tuberculosis hospital because one of our gifts to the native, besides alcohol, syphilis, and gunpowder, is tuberculosis. And my grandparents both were in and out of there a lot, volunteering. In the summertime, the tribe, they were Ojibwe, they would invite everyone in the town to come to powwow. And the men drummed and everyone danced. And then we were all invited to dance with them. And that just didn't feel like Tonto at all. And so I was trying to put these two images together, and I never was able to.
Hi, totally different tack, as usual. When I grew up, our family history, oral history, was that somewhere way back, someone on my dad's side married an Indian woman, and they lived, and we knew exactly where, and the place burnt down, and unfortunately, of course, those marriages weren't recorded, but him owning the land where they lived, that also was gone with a fire that destroyed all these things. It was something to be so proud of in our family. We would talk about, look at those high cheekbones. You know, you're definitely part Indian, and things like that. I was crushed by two things. As a child, being that I was a last child and with years between me and the next sibling above me, I felt an only child, and I used to beg my parents to please adopt a Native American little girl for me to have a sister. As an adult, most recently, I was shattered when 1, 2, 3, and me and ancestors,
Right.
DNA tests
Yes.
say no, there's no Native American in my bloodline, and that makes me really sad.
You never know.
Well, I don't have any memories like that. I'm not that old. But what I do remember is having, different conversations with my grandfather. I, too, am part of the Cherokee family by ways of Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been doing lately is I've tapped into the Ancestry.com. And I have a picture of my great-great-grandmother. She's standing next to my grandfather's mother. And you can just see the Indian in her. And my mom used to tell me that when she would go visit before she died, my great-great-grandmother died, she would braid her hair. And it was just so long and silky, and it just came, down her back. Kind of like my locks, but different. But extremely
So, Lee,
different.
was your family part of the Cherokee freedmen or the Cherokee?
I believe it was like more, there's a Chickasaw,
Okay.
a Chickasaw tribe. Right now I'm at this stage where it's kind of tricky because her name was Eliza Lane. And when I get hits, there's like a gazillion Eliza Lanes, but I know it's by way of Oklahoma. And I'm like, I'm stuck. So I wish I had more stories, but I can only go by the little bit of history that I know of. And I'm intrigued.
Anybody else?
So mine is different than my wife's, of course. But what I remember most, when we was in school, we got taught that the Indians, so to speak, they always was fighting for their land. And they will always be ambushed and burning of the teepees and stealing of the women and raping the women and things of that nature. That's what I remember most about Indian tribes, so to speak, from the books.
Little House on the Prairie. We'll take a couple more. Otherwise, we might not get to learn anything. But I love the conversation, so.
Well, besides the TV shows after school, between the Three Stooges, I do remember the cowboy and Indian, but I was always fascinated by the doeskin dresses and the moccasins and how beautiful the women were. And I never really, I don't know what was wrong with me. I didn't think that the Indians were bad. So, but I thought that the beadwork, I just have always enjoyed seeing it at museums too.
I was one of the pastors of Good Shepherd Presbyterian Church in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And twice a year we had our women's retreats, and the Indian women or the Native American women from the churches in southeastern Oklahoma would always come, and they'd come decked with food that they had prepared for the retreat, and it was wonderful. They were very generous, and I realized it wasn't easy for them to prepare so much food, but we loved having them come and be able to assimilate with us on those retreat days.
Thank you.
No, they were dressed as they probably would, just the way, not as.
I have a lot of pictures of my family, and they were not ever dressed like you see in the books. They just dressed normal. I was going to bring some pictures tonight, but I don't want to waste everybody's time. Let's Amy, and then let's move on. Let's take Amy.
Well, I don't watch movies, but have you ever seen the movie Osage County?
Yes.
I haven't been to a movie in a long time, but that's with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yep.
Yeah, and Martin Scorsese. I can't forget.
You mean the one that's just recently out?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Killers of the Flower Moon.
I haven't seen a movie in a long time, but yeah.
Did you see that movie?
No.
Oh, okay.
But I heard about it on TV. But I
Yes.
have, yes.
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 Yeah, if you haven't seen that movie, it's worth seeing.
Osage
Killers,
County.
it's actually called Killers of the Flower Moon.
But it's Osage. Yes.
Yes.
It's a true
It's
story.
out right now.
It's a true story.
You hold the microphone while I go to the next question. So some of you actually have already answered this, so if you did, you don't have to tell us again. But I'd like to know, those of you who have been on reservation land, was it what you were expecting? Was it different from what you expected? I will tell you that the first time I went to South Dakota, I grew up here in Arlington Heights. I watched all the shows. I learned what you learn in school. I had my family in Oklahoma, but honestly, I think because my grandmother grew up in the time where they were really trying not to be Native American so much, we learned about the Cherokees, and I knew about my great-great-grandfather, but the reservation wasn't really a thing that we talked about. So when I first took my family to South Dakota, I had in my mind something completely different than when I got to South Dakota. Vast, vast lands, beautiful, these little churches on the hill. It was not but poverty in the little villages. I just wasn't expecting that exactly. So I'm curious if there's anybody else. Amy, could you give it to Kim?
Yeah, this was, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. I went with our high school kids on a mission trip. We
Right.
spent a week at the, was Kelly on that trip?
She did not end up
I
going.
don't think so. We spent a week in the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana, and I also wasn't sure what to expect. The overwhelming feeling I had was of immense poverty, a great deal of pride in their native heritage. We were invited to dances. We, there was a great need among the older people to really teach the ways of the Blackfeet to the young children. But it was it was a huge area, beautiful in a lot of ways. It was Montana. There was nothing for anybody to do. There were no
Right.
jobs. There were no, Mike Noble, I remember saying, I wish I could put a factory here. The families were subsiding on a little bit of government assistance that they were entitled to. They had a house, lots and lots of alcoholism, lots of social problems there.
Yes.
That's very, very, very much overwhelming, I thought. And just nobody, they were like stuck on this land. Nobody had anything to do. So there was a lot of drinking all day long.
Right.
So it was sad. I felt sad.
Sad. Mhm.
Yeah.
Anybody else? A couple more.
In the early 90s, I drove my son up to Boy Scout camp up in Wisconsin, up near Pearson, Wisconsin. And there's a reservation I had to drive through to get there. And the sign as you entered the reservation was, "You are leaving U.S. territory. U.S. laws no longer apply. You are under tribal law." I
Right.
drove very carefully.
So when I talked earlier about you Googling the U.S. Supreme Court cases, that is exactly what there are a few cases out there right now about that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, Lana.
I lived in Las Vegas for quite a few years. The Paiutes have large reservation land near the Las Vegas area. I was 3 or 4 different times on the reservation. One was to go to a powwow and a dance and all that. Another was to one of the casinos that they had built. And another one was to a golf club that they had built. And it amazed me the opulence that I could see in those places compared to the little houses that they lived in their real living. And I realized that they were trying to just do as much as they could to get money from however they were allowed to do it. And out there in Vegas, casinos were the big deal. And so
Right.
that was my experience with them.
I mean, we only have 5 hours over these weeks to talk about this. It's very complicated. We're only scratching the surface, but what I hope is that it starts to bring these things to light when you hear them in the news, and that you'll think about, oh, gosh, I heard something about that. So one more question. Anybody else? I don't want to skip. What? There are 500 and, wait, I don't want to say this wrong because I wrote it down. I believe it's 532 federally recognized tribes. So what that means is that they're tribes that are recognized, and I could be a little bit off on that, but I believe that's the number. That means that the federal government recognizes them as a tribe, that they have land either held in trust or reservation land. Those tribes have their own governments, and I believe right now there's about 532 of those tribes. A lot. There's just a lot going on with those. And every tribe is different. They all have different customs, different governments, all of that kind of stuff. Different languages. I really had this goal of being able to speak Cherokee tonight a little bit, but I'm not quite brave enough yet, so I'm still working on it. I've been doing the online classes, but I'm not that good. All right, so let's get into what we're here for. I'd like to hear when, and don't worry, if it was tonight, that's okay. But tell us when you first heard of the term, the doctrine of discovery? Anybody who wants to share that? What? Tonight. So when I came back and
Talking about the doctrine of discovery, and I'm like, oh, I should probably know what that is. I think I Googled it.
Okay, so I was on that travel seminar with 30 Presbyterians. I would say 75% of them were Presbyterian pastors and a couple seminary students. And I would say 75% of us on the trip, until we started doing our work, our pre-work for the trip, didn't really know much about it at all. So you are in good company. Anybody else here know about it for a long time?
Well, I've been a part of the Middle East Task Force
Mhm.
of Presbyterian Chicago for several decades, and that is where I first heard of this, because that is how Palestine became Israel.
Right, so the doctrine of discovery is really about colonialism, not just in the United States, but really all over the world. And so that's why Jan had heard of it early on. Anybody else heard about it from some interesting source? Okay, well, let's move on and see what we can find out about it. You can, will you want to just hold on to that? And will the battery run out, or no? Okay, in case somebody has a question. So I also recently did a book study, and I thought this was a good way to get us kind of started on what in the world is this doctrine of discovery. This is a book, it's called The Land Is Not Empty. It's by a woman named Sarah Augustine. She is very active. She's a Tewa woman, a Native American woman, but she does not live on the reservation, and she will call herself a displaced person. But in this book, she says that the doctrine of discovery is a theological, philosophical, and legal framework dating back to the 15th century that gave Christian governments moral and legal right to invade and seize indigenous lands and dominate indigenous people. So when we say it's about colonialism, this is the way that, while the actual acts really started in the 15th century, it really goes all the way back to the Crusades and the beginning of Christianity, where they were talking about how they were really the only way to be. And so what happens is, when you see people that you think are what they call pagans or infidels, that's where they started going in and taking over these lands. So let's move on to the next one. And so there is this principle that really is a Latin phrase for empty land. And so what it means is that discovered lands are considered devoid of human beings if the people aren't Christian. So in the 15th century, if you weren't part, this is, before Reformation and things, if you weren't part of the Catholic Church, you were considered a pagan. There were Muslims, so they also were not right. Infidels, just anybody who did not believe in what the Catholic Church was teaching. Any of those were considered empty lands. And so the United States, or North America at the time, even though there were about 60 million indigenous people living in North America at the time, it was considered uninhabited land because they were not Christian. And so what happened was, so it was considered empty land. Thus, this book, The Land Is Not Empty. At that time, I'm not really sure. I'm sorry. Probably 600 or 700. I'm not really sure. So the doctrine of discovery was first articulated by what they call a papal bull. And a papal bull is a document, basically a writing that is issued by the Pope, and you could still have these today, where they say this is how it's going to be. So the first one was in 1452, and another one in 1455, and then a big one in 1493, right after Christopher Columbus had his voyage to the Americas. But Pope Nicholas, these papal bulls were actually supporting Portugal and Spain. So they were kind of at odds with each other about what land they could take over. So in 1455, the papal bull issued by Nicholas authorized Portugal to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all, and I'm not quite sure how to say that word. Do you know? Saracens. And pagans, so Muslims and pagans. This is what gave the Portuguese and then the Spaniards permission to go into places like Africa and enslave people. It is what gave them permission to come to North America, to South America, Central America, Canada, all of these places, and just take over the land, because the papal bulls then became legal documents. And so the Portuguese and the Spaniards, 1493, the papal bull was issued by Pope Alexander, and it ordered, this was a quote, hitherto that land that had not been discovered by others, so even though there were 60 million people here, or in Africa there could have been even more, they weren't considered inhabited because the people were not Christian. So when we might think that the church didn't have anything to do with all these governments taking over all these lands, that is really not true. So once they were able to take over the land then belonged to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and it gave them power and authority and jurisdiction. So at that time, a lot of these takeovers of land were between the Portuguese and the Spanish. Any questions on that? Susan?
I'm thinking I know why they call it a bull.
Yeah.
One of our favorite playground taunts was finders keepers, losers weepers.
Yep.
The ultimate.
Yes.
They were losers because
They weren't Christian. Right. So what happened after the Reformation is that this doctrine of discovery became used by other European and Protestant and Anglican, so Henry VIII, and other European groups started moving into North America and taking over the land. So when I talked about it is kind of complicated because, okay, so my great-great-great-grandfather had a Scottish father who married a Cherokee woman because that happened all the time. I don't know, I wasn't there then, so I don't know how all that, I can't say if it was good or bad. I don't know, but I do know that a lot of the land and the government was based on whether or not you were Christian. And in the next coming weeks, we'll see that the church has played a huge role in the development of reservations and the loss of land to Native Americans and the boarding schools. And the doctrine of discovery really is what was the basis for things like, I know you've heard of manifest destiny. That I think we all can say we've heard of that for a very long time, where people just, Little House on the Prairie, you get out there and find your land. The Louisiana Purchase, the basis for those things is all the doctrine of discovery, where if you were not considered a human being if you were not Christian. And so the land could be taken from you. And that it is, yes, it is complicated, but that when you start reading, I think you'll find that there's a lot of fact in that. That's what it boils down to. Now, when we get talking in next weeks about how this plays out today, in 1823, there was actually a case at the U.S. Supreme Court, and the decision was written by Chief Justice John Marshall, famous, probably all heard of him. This case actually was in Illinois. It had to do with the Potawatomi tribe. And what it did was basically say, and I'm going to simplify it for time, that Native Americans, indigenous peoples, they were allowed to live on the land, but they didn't have rights, and so they couldn't sell it to a company. The only people that could buy would be the U.S. government. And so the Potawatomi were wanting to, I think, sell some land to a company, a manufacturer in those days, but they were not able to, because really the U.S. government owns the land. And so the doctrine of discovery was actually cited in this and became legal framework for future decisions. And there's actually a case in 2005 that was through the Oneida Nation and the state of New York that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And one of my very favorites, although this one I'm like, oh, Ruth Bader Ginsburg actually sided not with the Oneida Nation, and so she became not well loved by the indigenous population because of this decision. And you can go and read more about it, but she cited the doctrine of discovery. Precedent, yes. It was precedent, and she cited it. That was only in 2005, where this document that said that if you're white Christian males, you can just go in and take over the land. Even the United States Constitution, the doctrine of discovery plays a part in that. If you read it closely, you will see that Native Americans are considered savages. And so they are not considered human beings in that document. But it's, for me, I find it, when you really start digging it, it's pretty disappointing to learn. Sometimes it's disappointing to learn history a different way as you get older. Jerry?
You said that white Christian males.
Mm-hmm.
So the female was sort of like.
Right, so back like when the Constitution was written, the early 1800s, the only people who could own land were white men. And so that's really, if you read some of the, history, some of the scholarship that's out now, that's really who these things were written for. The laws were written for land-owning people. And the only people who could own land were white men.
And women were second-class citizens.
Pretty, yeah, and yes.
Yeah.
Lana?
I'm just sitting here, it's all swirling in my head, but I'm going back to the fact that it all started from Catholicism, and now it seems like all of Christianity.
Right, well, it really started even before that.
Okay, but the written documents.
The written documents, yes. But other people jumped on it without a problem.
Presbyterian church, for example, jumped on it, and when did
So next, when we start talking about the Indian removals and the church missions, so when I talked about the 95 Native American churches, those were all set up by Native or Presbyterian missionaries who went in to convert the Native Americans to being Christian. and some of them still are. And I mean, I talked to some like, how do you feel about that? It's another complicated thing. But a lot of those Presbyterian missionaries went in, and now they're all gone, and so now these churches are struggling. So these, I'm just, some of the doctrine of discovery, you might say, well, that was like 1500s, what? But a lot of things that go on today have to do with the fact that people could just go in and take over land. And so things like, this is the city of Sherrill in the Oneida Nation. That was the Ruth Bader Ginsburg precedent decision. Oak Flat is a current, that's something you could Google and learn more about that. A lot of these have to do with land rights and who actually owns land subterranean and above ground. Native Americans can live on the land, but they don't necessarily have the right, and then the government or whoever the government hires can go in and build places like Los Alamos, things like that. McGirt versus Oklahoma is what I referenced earlier about, Ken, was that you that said when you're entering tribal territory and the laws? Yep. So that has to do, there's lots of them. Some of them I have over on the table. We're going to be talking about some of them in the next weeks. Feel free to, if you now, you're like, oh, I got to hear a little more about this. If you find something in the next weeks, bring it with you, and we can take a look at that. I know we went through it quickly, and I know it's complicated. And so, and we only have an hour each week. I would say that you could ask questions, except it's 8 o'clock, so you might have to save your questions for next week, unless somebody has a really pressing one that they can ask quickly. I don't want to keep you late. I really was trying to time it out, but yeah. I think I have. Daniel Day-Lewis? Yeah.
I saw
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, I was gonna say.
So next week, we talk about Indian removal and land rights in the United States and the role of the church. Maybe a little about Thanksgiving and what we learned about Thanksgiving as kids, and, oh, is that really what happened? Doesn't mean you can't eat turkey, because they even do at the Navajo Nation. I just got an email about them passing out their turkeys, so don't worry. But it is something to think about, is that really what happened? I doubt it. You're right. And then I just wanted to leave you with this Cherokee prayer blessing. This picture here is Park Hill Presbyterian Church in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, or in Park Hill, Oklahoma, near Tahlequah. This church, I don't think it's the original building now, but this was actually the church that my great-great-grandfather founded when they landed in Oklahoma after the Trail of Tears. But this is a Cherokee blessing that's fairly well known. But may the warm winds of heaven blow softly upon your house. May the Great Spirit bless all who enter there. May your moccasins make happy tracks in many snows, and may rainbows always touch your shoulder. I think it's a really beautiful one. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you come back next week and learn more.